All right, this next video focuses on finding the greatest common factor, the least common multiple, something that a lot of maybe students in the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grades end up being challenged with. So we're going to focus just a little bit on this, and I think the first thing we need to really understand is, I think we need to understand what the word factor means and what the word multiple means. So I'm going to start with greatest common factor, but I'm going to ask you this. If I asked you the question, what are the factors of 6? Most students give me the answer fairly quickly, and most students come up with it and they say 2 and 3. And my question is, why do you choose 2 and 3? Well, you choose 2 and 3 because 2 times 3 is 6, but also these are the numbers that go into 6. So when we ask for the greatest common factor, we're actually asking for the largest number that goes into both of the numbers we're talking about. This number is not going to be bigger than the numbers that are there. It's actually going to be smaller because factors are numbers that go into them. So as an example, if the problem said, find the greatest common factor of 8 and 10, we would be looking for the largest number that goes into both 8 and 10. It's going to be a number that's smaller than both 8 and 10. And maybe by looking at that, you could say, well, it's 2. 2 is the biggest number that goes into 8, that also goes into 10. If we jump to multiples, I'm going to ask you what are the multiples of 6. And I would hope that you would say, well, that would be 6, 12, 18, 24, etc. If you look at what I've written down there, those are the numbers that 6 goes into. 6 goes into itself, it goes into 12, it goes into 18, it goes into 24. In fact, this is 6 times 1, 6 times 2, 6 times 3, 6 times 4, etc. So again, if we go back here and we say, what is the least common multiple? Multiple is a number that they go into. So if we use the same numbers 8 and 10 and said, what's the least common multiple? We would be looking for the smallest number that both of these go into. Now there are ways that you can go about finding that, and that's what we're going to focus on at this point. So hopefully we're okay. Factors are the numbers that go into both of the numbers, whereas a multiple is what they both go into. A little bit confusing because factors are smaller, but we're asking for the largest of those. Multiples are bigger, but we're actually asking for the smallest of those multiples. Now let's jump down. Let's say that we're asked to find the greatest common factor of 24 and 40. A way that a lot of end up doing this is to take 24 and break this number apart using what we call a factor tree. 4 times 6 is 24, so I would split 24 into 4 times 6. 4 breaks down into 2 times 2, and 6 breaks down into 2 times 3. So if that's the case, I think we've factored this all the way down to what we call prime factors. These numbers cannot be factored anything other than 1 in itself. We have 2 times 2 times 2, which can be written as 2 to the third times 3. Now, knowing what you know about exponents, 2 times 2 times 2, which is 2 to the third, is 8, times 3 is 24. So we have broken 24 down into prime factors. If we take the number 40, we're going to do the same thing. Make a little factor tree here. I'm going to opt to use 4 and 10. You can certainly use 5 and 8. It doesn't matter which pair you use that would multiply to give you that. You'll get to the same spot. Keep factoring until each number is prime. 4 breaks into 2 times 2, and 10 breaks into 2 times 5. And in this case, we have 2 to the third times 5. So now we have broken each of these numbers down into prime factors. We now need to decide what is the greatest common factor. And the greatest common factor at this point is you have to compare the factors and you take exactly what they have in common. As an example, this has 3 2's and this one has 3 2's. Would you agree? We have 3 2's in common, so we're going to take 2 to the third as part of the greatest common factor. We have a 3 here, but there are no 3's over here, so there's no 3 in common. We have 1 5, we have no 5's, they're not in common. The only thing that they have in common is 3 2's, which 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. Therefore, 8 is the largest number. It's the greatest common factor of 24 and 40. 8's the largest number that goes into both 24 and 40. Now, I should mention one thing because this turned out where they were the same. Let's say that we got down to the bottom of our factor trees here, and let's say we had something like 2 to the second times 3 times 5, and over here we had 2 to the third times 3 to the second times, we'll go with a 5 here. What would make up our greatest common factor? In this case, we have 2 2s, and here we have 3 2s, but the number of 2s they have common would simply be 2 2s. This one has 2, this one has 3. They have 2 in common. This one over here has an extra one, but we can't take it. This has 1 3, this has 2 3s. We'll take a 3. And this one has 1 5, and that one has 1 5. We'll take a 5. So in this case, our greatest common factor would end up being 4 times 15, I believe, which turns out to be 60. So just pointing out, if we have different numbers of factors, we would have to compare those in this case. The next part is finding the least common multiple. What's the smallest number that 16 and 24 go into? Once again, we're going to take the 16. We will use the factor tree just as we did before, breaking it into 4 times 4, and each of those breaking into 2 times 2. 16 turns out to be 2 to the 4th power when we break it down into prime factors. 24, well, there's lots of choices. 4 times 6, 3 times 8, 2 times 12. I like to use 4 times 6, so 4 times 6 it is. 4 breaks into 2 times 2. 6 breaks into 2 times 3. We now have 2 to the 3rd times 3. There's our prime factorization form. When it comes to finding the least common multiple, we now need to compare the prime factorization form, but now we don't take what's in common, we take the most of either one. So if I have 4 2s here and I have 3 2s here, the definition of least common multiple says I have to have 2 to the 4th power. I have to have the most number of 2s that shows up, not the common. The greatest common factor, we want what was in common. I have 1 3 here and I have 0 3s here. Remember, I have to have the most number of 3s that shows up. So in this case, I would take a 3. This turns out to be, if you look at the mathematics here, 2 to the 4th is 16, multiplied by 3 turns out to be 48. So 48 is the least common multiple. It's the smallest number that both 16 and 24 go into. I believe 16 times 3 is 48 and 24 times 2. Therefore, 48 is our answer when it comes to least common multiples. I hope this helps out. Again, don't be afraid to ask a question if it doesn't.